All right, we are live. Welcome to the show, everyone. Well, it must be summer because riot season has begun. It really is a shame that it's completely unsurprising. Rioters are liberating IMAX and burning cars in Los Angeles to show just how much they disagree with immigration enforcement. And there appear to be receipts on who exactly is organizing these mostly peaceful protests. And the feds are not taking it lying down this time around, it seems. And there are lies all around. We know that the media isn't going to cover any of it very accurately at all. And that leads us into a discussion about how our knowledge system, media, academia, and science are breaking down right in front of us. We're also going to look at the deal that Trump just solidified with China and how labor over in the UK is getting a nice little lesson in how the Laffer Curve works. We are going to talk about all of this and more in episode 498 of the In the Tank podcast.
Large group of people. It could turn very volatile if you move law enforcement in there in the wrong way and turn what is just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn into a massive confrontation and altercation between officers and demonstrators.
I also like to get with the boys and watch cars burn just to have a little bit of fun. Anyway, welcome to the In the Tank podcast, everyone. I am Linnea Luke and your host. We also have Jim Lakely, Vice President of the Heartland Institute. Jim, how are you doing? Is Chicago burning yet?
Chicago isn't burning, although I did see a clip on X of a driver who was fed up with all of the disruption in the Loop, which is the downtown area of Chicago, and he decided just to plow through them. And thankfully, he didn't hurt anybody, but the protesters were not very happy with him. But, look, probably the worst thing you can do in a riot is stop your car. Let's be honest about that. They're comparing these riots in Los Angeles to the 1992 riots after the Rodney King verdict that let the cops found them not guilty. And, one of the most memorable things about that was the horrible fate of Reginald Denny, if you remember, pulled out of his truck by rioters and his head smashed in with a brick. So I know we have listeners in California and other places that might go up in riot season. So be careful out there.
On that cheerful note, we also have Sam Karnick, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute. Sam, do you have any interesting, spicy stuff going on where you're living right now or no?
Very interestingly, no, and it's a pretty decent sized town, and they're saying where all the riots are going to be this weekend, and we're not even on the list, which I think is just awful. But maybe we'll go travel and find a riot.
Yeah, what a shame.
Are they going to riot when the Indiana Pacers win the NBA championship, Sam?
You know what? No, there will just be joy, just joy.
Okay.
We're kind of chill people here.
All right. Well, before we get started, as ever, wow. Okay, lost that. All right, let's try that again. All right, before we get started, as always, you guys, if you want to support the show, you can go to heartland.org/inthetank and donate there. Please also click the thumbs up to like this video, and remember that sharing it helps to break through some of YouTube's suppression. Even just leaving a comment helps as well. If you're an audio listener, you can help us out by leaving a nice review on whatever platform you're using. All right, so let's get right into it because I have a feeling that we're going to go over as usual today, especially since we have so much to cover on these riots because there are so many interesting angles that you can take to discuss them. So today we're kind of combining our main topic, which is the riots, with Unhinged because it is unhinged. And so we're flipping the show on its head this week. We are going to cover it first at the top of the show here. All right, so just for background information, I want to go over the timeline of the riots in Los Angeles in case anyone, especially some of our abroad listeners, are not entirely caught up on what's going on here. So they started last Friday and went all the way through the weekend, and they're likely to continue all the way through this next weekend. Now, a lot of the media has been claiming that the riots began in response to ICE immigration raids at a Home Depot. However, this is disputed by border czar Tom Homan, who said that ICE was not conducting ordinary immigration issues. So some people who are illegals who were at Home Depot got caught up in this, but what they were actually doing was serving warrants to people who were related to a money laundering scheme connected to the cartels, especially the Colombians and the Mexican cartel. So anyway, in any case, rioting is not the proper response to what happened here, but the weather is nice out now, so I guess that's what people feel like doing. Anyway, and also they're getting paid, it turns out. So California's government decided to do the absolute bare minimum in response to this. And so Trump and the feds decided to step in to try and bring order back to these people hanging out with their pals, watching cars burn. The National Guard and some of the Marines from Nine Palms have been deployed. And the assistant to the Secretary of Defense said that the overall cost is going to be about $134 million. And this is another area where the media has been a little bit tricksy with how they report it. This is not like some additional cost. This money was going to be spent on doing drills and stuff anyway. It's something that's, the money has already been spent. Now they're just using it for this purpose instead of doing drills and stuff. They're going to work. Anyway, like I said, there are a lot of angles that we could come at this from, but I want to get the panel's initial thoughts on the situation, and we have some clips to play. Let's do the Mad Max one, not the Pelosi one, but the Mad Max scene one first, and then we'll go from there.
And even those who were out of step with what we are advocating, peaceful protest, did not create any violence. Nobody was shot, nobody was killed. Get it in your head. And so when martial law is called, what are you going to say? I missed the point. Don't miss the point, you all. Don't think that somehow, because they called out the National Guard, there was violence. There was no violence. I was on the street. I know. And I went from downtown detention back out into the community, talking to people what happened in Paramount, what happened in Compton, what happened in Inglewood. So, first of all, get it straight. And don't just rely on what you're being told or the few incidents that you saw.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, I just want to comment real quick. I see Donnie in the chat saying, does he get to be on episode 500? Yes, you get to be on episode 500 if you would like. We are getting up to that number, so it'll be in a couple of weeks here. So yeah. Anyway, so that was pretty incredible. I don't know if that counts as gaslighting per se, but it's certainly an appalling level of misinformation. And the amazing thing is, if you turn on the television, if you go and watch MSNBC or one of those channels, you are not seeing just how bad it is out there. If it wasn't for alternative media and X and whatnot, we would not know that there is a significant amount of violence going on out there. What are your guys' thoughts here?
I think it's interesting because really we're in the midst of a color revolution here. This is really an attempt to what you do in a color revolution. You remember what Arab Spring and taking over Syria and things like that is. What you do is you delegitimize the present government. You call it a regime, and you say that it's not a legal regime. It's not a legal government. So you delegitimize that government, and you say, well, they're doing things that are simply outside their authority. And in the present case, you have people saying, well, they called in the president called in the National Guard. He doesn't have any right to do that, and so he's operating outside his authority. We need to rise up and throw lots of chunks of concrete at police down below us below the viaducts. So we have to do that, because otherwise, bad things. Trump wins is really what happens, but the American people win too. We'll get into that, but this is a highly organized thing, and it is an attempt to delegitimize the present government and to legitimize the opposition as the authentic government of the United States. To say that the real people who should be in charge are people like Gavin Newsom and the great Maxine Waters and Ms. Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, who are all so extraordinarily competent and well-meaning that they will turn the United States into a wonderful utopia when we get rid of the evil fascist regime that is currently in place. So what we do is you have a color revolution. Well, these color revolutions don't just pop up. They aren't just a whole bunch of people saying, this is terrible, we have to fight back. No, they're always organized. Typically, they're organized with a lot of foreign money as well. And so what you have here is an absolute renewal of the color revolution approach, which incidentally was started by the U.S. intelligence agencies. We're the ones who started those color revolutions in a lot of these places, if not all. And so what you have is a situation where this is organized, this is intentional, and it's not going to stop soon, because this is all about an information processing activity, where what they're doing is trying to put in the minds of the American public certain templates by which to interpret all events. And that template is the illegitimacy of the present government and the existence of an alternative that will do much better, and they're ready and able to serve the great American people. So that's what's going on here.
All right. Well, I think we have another good clip of media playing their usual game here. If we can pull that up.
The LA County police say that they have it under control. Carrying a flag is not illegal, as you know. What did happen in 1992 was so different from what we're seeing now. I mean, that was a real riot.
Video after video has shown that these agents are the ones provoking protesters and also making up, aggression by these protesters that later video shows people were not aggressive.
We are having an administration that's targeting peaceful protests, people that are there to protest. The president is sending the National Guard because he doesn't like the scenes. He doesn't like the scenes of people peacefully protesting.
The unrest is isolated. LA is home to millions of people, most of whom are having a normal day here on Sunday.
You've heard reports that there are riots on the streets of Los Angeles. That is not what's happening across the city of Los Angeles.
Governor Newsom's right. There wasn't anything like a riot happening on Friday, Saturday.
We just witnessed a protester thanking a National Guardsman for his service here in California.
LAPD, by most estimates, had this under control last night.
No, I don't think the National Guard is needed now. Things in LA are calm. There was a protest that got a little unruly late at night.
There have been no violence where anybody that was protesting hit anybody, shot anybody, threatened anybody. Nothing has happened.
What is just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn.
Most of those demonstrations were very peaceful. They were chanting, they were shouting. People were driving by, honking their horns.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim, I know you have comments about that one.
I do. It's funny. These riots are real, but the media is trying to say that they're fake. And J6 was a real 4-hour riot that the media also tried to fake into an insurrection against the government of the United States. So, the media is, again, covering itself with glory. And I say that sarcastically, of course, when it comes to this. I mean, Brian Stelter, I don't understand he was let go from CNN for a good reason, because he's a complete shill and mouthpiece for the most radicals in the Democratic Party. And he was at it again. They hired him back, and he was at it again on CNN, saying that, most people in Los Angeles are just having an ordinary day. Well, most people in Ford's Theater, had a pretty ordinary day, except for Abe Lincoln, right? And his wife. They had a little bit of a different experience. So, but whatever, the show was great. That's what's really important. This is not 2020 anymore. But the left in the Democratic Party, I think, is they're still playing that 2020 playbook. The only thing missing right now is Kamala Harris hasn't promoted a defense fund to get these professional thugs out of jail, but it's still early. That may yet happen.
Yeah, well, and sorry.
No, go ahead.
And it's bad when even Fetterman has been commenting on this and saying it's bad. From the Hill, we have Fetterman quoted saying, "This is anarchy and true chaos," he wrote in a post on X. He said, "My party loses the moral high ground when we refuse to condemn setting cars on fire, destroying buildings, and assaulting law enforcement." He added, "I unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstrations, and immigration, but this is not that." So, yeah, no, and this is a good segue too into, Fetterman is saying, look, my own party is lying about this, or they're trying to downplay something that really is a major problem. And so what else is unhinged here is that the Democrats are also trying to tie this to January 6th, as Jim alluded to. So Pelosi lied about January 6th. And I think we have a quote that. Man, I am just mealy mouthed today. Anyway, Pelosi lied about January 6th, and I think we have a clip for that as well. It's kind of a long one, so hang in there while we play it, you guys, but I think it's pertinent to what's going on here.
In a bipartisan way, on January 6th, with violence against the Constitution, against the Congress, and against the United States Capitol, we begged the President of the United States to send in the National Guard. He would not do it.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
What were you doing on that day?
On that day specifically, responding to preparing to mobilize and deploy the National Guard once we got the lawful request from the local governing authority, which was the mayor of D.C. and the Speaker of the House.
Now, how many days in advance were you working to prepare the Department of Defense to help secure the Capitol on January 6th?
Days in advance, Senator. We were in the Oval Office on an unrelated national security matter with the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and myself. And the President authorized up to 20,000 plus National Guardsmen and women to secure any security measures necessary related to the Capitol. So we were moving to the fullest extent of the law before the requisite request came from a local governing authority days ahead of time.
And while you were Chief of Staff at DOD, how many times did DOD approach Capitol Police and ask if they needed National Guard assistance?
I believe those letters are well documented, numerous instances, and numerous of those instances, those requests were shut down.
Now, am I correct that the Capitol Sergeant at Arms said assistance was unnecessary?
That's correct, Senator.
Who did the Sergeant at Arms report to?
The Speaker of the House.
That would have been Nancy Pelosi at the time. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous.
The Democrat elected mayor in D.C. either request or allow National Guard assistance.
She put in writing on the days leading up to January 6th a declination for National Guard additional support. And that letter is available publicly to the world.
So, and just to speak English for folks at home, a declination meant she said no, don't send National Guard. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And yet, in a contra-constitutional way, he has sent the National Guard into California. Something is very wrong with this picture.
Yeah. Lizard people indeed.
Yeah,
Jim?
something is very wrong with this picture, and I put that clip together, those clips together, and to make the point that we're not going to let, again, like I said, this isn't 2020 anymore, and the media is not going to be able to set this narrative. There are independent journalists out there on the ground reporting live on X and then posting their clips on other social media so that we can know what's going on here. So this whole, Mad Maxine, Frank Drebin routine from The Naked Gun, that there's please disperse, nothing to see here. If you know, you know. That crap isn't going to work anymore. And Trump is not going to let this accelerate and get farther out of hand. And that's why he's bringing in as many resources as he feels is necessary to make sure it doesn't get out of hand. There's been some demonstrations in other cities, but to my knowledge, at this very moment, none of them have devolved into the fiery and violent chaos that has happened in Los Angeles. And Donald Trump is going to do all he can to make sure that that doesn't happen. We are not going to have a repeat of this summer of love. And, we don't have a clip of LA Mayor Karen Bass saying this, I don't think. But she did say I heard it. She said on CNN that there are activist groups in Los Angeles who would hear about an ICE operation and then jump into action. So she knows these people. She knows these NGO groups. She knows that they are funded and they're basically professional agitators because she admitted it on television that they hear about an ICE operation enforcing immigration law and then they jump into action. And so, and she is, her point, her position has been that these riots are not the fault of these professional thugs and color revolutionaries, as Sam Karnick mentioned earlier here in this podcast, but that the fault for all of this goes to ICE for enforcing federal immigration law. And that's another thing that has really surprised the Democrats, and I think it's really ironic. The immigration law we have in this country right now, you could fairly say is a product of the Democratic Party. Because whenever there's immigration reform bills coming up in Congress every once in a while, Republicans generally want to be more strict. They have their own vision of it. But the best they could do is get basically what the Democrats and the media wants as our immigration policy. So the irony here is that Donald Trump is actually enforcing these immigration laws that the Democrats have put forth and put into law in this country. But they did so very cynically, because they knew that no Democratic president administration was ever going to enforce the law as written. They knew that no Republican president like George W. Bush was ever really going to enforce immigration law as written, because the Chamber of Commerce likes all of these illegal immigrants. The only time it has ever been actually enforced for maybe the last 30 years is with this president, Donald Trump. And so Democrats, if you are not happy with the immigration laws in this country and the way it's being enforced, you are to blame, because these are your laws. I'm sure Donald Trump would actually have much stricter laws that he would like to implement, but he's just working with what he's got.
Right, and you kind of got ahead of us a little bit on what we're going to talk about here in a second, which is where exactly is the funding coming from for these protests? Because although the media and the Democrats right now want you to think that it's very organic, that they've just popped up out of nowhere, they saw some guys being arrested at Home Depot and they said, this is ridiculous. They are picking up innocent people. So enter the NGO sphere here. So at the Substack Open the Books, this individual broke down some of this funding here. So I'm going to read to you guys a couple of passages here. All right. Over just the past 2 years, the state of California poured tens of millions of dollars into nonprofits involved in immigration and refugee advocacy and legal services. Just 5 key non-governmental organizations, that's NGOs, documented here received $73.6 million in just 2023 and 2024. And all of them include deportation defense in their work. They're also all 501c3 charitable nonprofits, meaning that they're restricted in the amount of time that they can devote to political advocacy. Nevertheless, many participate in advocacy at the state and or federal level, with some emphasizing policy work in states other than California. These organizations represent only a portion of nonprofits receiving funding related to immigration legal support and advocacy. So I'm going to highlight some of the interesting ones that are listed here. There's a graphic, if you scroll down a bit, right there, that graphic. Yep. So the first one is the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, which I'm going to call CHURLA. They have been identified on X by California attorney Laura Powell as a organization that's particularly involved in the LA riots and resistance to federal immigration law enforcement. Powell noted that CHURLA's strong relationship with California and the LA government leadership, including Mayor Bass, and she outlined how the nonprofit leads a coalition hotline where members of the public can send in tips on the location of ICE agents, and a rapid response network deploys activists to the location. So this is not grassroots. Immigrant Defenders Law Center, IMDEF, is focused on preventing deportation for criminal non-citizens. So this nonprofit states that it's interested in taking cases that can refine, clarify, and extend the law, as we recently demonstrated in People versus Manzanilla, where a California Court of Appeal issued a published decision clarifying key legal issues that impact non-citizens seeking to vacate immigration adverse convictions. So in other words, IMDEF seeks to establish legal precedent to prevent the deportation of criminal non-citizens through litigation. All right, so don't expect the rioting to calm down yet, you guys. We're already seeing burning and looting in cities across the country. Apparently not Chicago yet, but I think Baltimore or Philadelphia has some very peaceful car burnings happening at the moment. And organized protests are planned further for this Saturday. The organizers in charge here are hoping to cause disorder in the rest of the country to distract from the military parade that Trump is putting on in DC to celebrate the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army. So to viewers in the U.S., there is a map available online where you can look it up and see where those protests are planned. It's called No Kings, and they are not trying to hide at all that this particular one is planned. And I would not be surprised whatsoever if they are actively planning to have stuff that's a lot less peaceful than they claim on their website. There are always rumors about like mysterious pallets of bricks and stuff popping up, or like anti-bear spray masks and stuff showing up on pallets for them to put on. So people are organizing this stuff. They're supplying the protesters. And anyway, yeah, it's interesting. My town is on there, which is going to be interesting. But the last time that there was an organized like anti-Trump protest in my town, it was like maybe 40, 55 plus like retired people hanging out on the side of the road, waving signs and asking for honking and stuff. So I'm not too worried about any violence or anything here. I kind of live in like a popular retirement area. so mine don't get too sporty. But Jim, watch out, because I know you're near Chicagoland. I mean, you're in the suburbs, but still.
Remember that those retired people are being paid by the government.
I don't think they
Social
are.
Security. With their Social Security and their Medicare.
Yeah, organized by Indivisible, which is a pop-up group of complete maniacs who are basically separating themselves from anybody who is not working full time to get rid of Donald Trump. But the professionalization of this, and this is all funded. I mean, that's the thing. The idea that people are out there on the streets. Certainly, there are people who are motivated by their principles to get out and demonstrate. But so much of the population, especially of the rioters, are funded. They are not. They're not doing this as a hobby or as entertainment for the most part. A lot of this is well funded, as you just outlined there, Linnea, with millions of dollars. A lot of these NGOs. It's actually, we're funding a lot of this. Our tax dollars go to these NGOs that are supposed to, help immigrants or fight for immigrant rights or whatever. And what they end up doing is sending color revolutionary shock troops out on the street to cause chaos. And what? That's right. That's right. And so, again, Trump is not going to let this fester. Actually, in fairness, he should have cracked down on the 2020 riots like this. He was president after all. and he probably regrets that. So we're going to see him do what he should have done then. Now,
Well, in 2020, for example, it starts in Minnesota. And I think you may recall who was the governor of Minnesota at that time. And so getting the National Guard called into Minnesota was not on the table. So, in fact, that would have accomplished what I suspect this current effort is all about, which is to get Trump to do something extraordinary that will make him, that will delegitimize him, that they can say straight out, that's unconstitutional, that's outrageous, that's way overboard, it's fascist. Now, I think that probably is their game. This is a very organized thing, as we've made very clear here. This isn't just some sort of populist uprising. It's quite the contrary. It's from the top down. And so the notion is to lure Trump in. Now, I think that it's a dumb idea, and I'll tell you why. Because what they're putting together is an interesting contrast that brings you back to the 1960s, but with an enormous difference. So what they want to bring in is this contrast between riots in the streets or tanks in the streets. And they will want to depict Trump as having this being his Tiananmen Square, okay? Tanks running over hippies, but this isn't that. In the 1960s, when you had the anti-war protests going on, there was an intense danger, or perceived danger, let's say, to very, very important people, meaning the children, especially the male children, particularly the male children of wealthy people. Meaning that you had the draft. Nothing really built on, for example, the Watts riots and so forth. Nothing really built on that until the draft started to hit heavily. And so you have people being drafted into the military, and they feel like, well, if I go to Vietnam and end up fighting over there, why, I could get killed or maimed. And their parents, who are friends with Walter Cronkite and all the big shots in the media and in the government, say, well, we can't have this. And the young people go rioting in the streets, and the press say, well, but these are justifiable riots. So what you have here, though, was you had people, there was sympathy for the young people, because obviously no one wants to go to war, no one wants to get killed, or in general, I suppose there are people who do, but in general, that they don't want that. So you had great sympathy there. And so when you have tanks in the streets, putting that down, you're putting down the children of very powerful people. In the current case, you're contrasting riots in the streets by foreigners, by invaders, by illegal immigrants and the like. Let me say people here illegally and the like. And so you're saying, well, we need to riot in the streets to protect these people. And having tanks in the streets would just be fascism. I don't think that that's going to work. I don't think that that's going to play out the way they envision it. The way this all comes about, I think, is that they're too much in their own little tank. They're sitting there, their own echo chamber, as the phrase goes. So they're in their own echo chamber, and they look at this as if this is Vietnam all over again, or Rodney King. I love the idea of no kings. Does that refer to no Rodney Kings as well? I wonder about that. So the whole issue is very different today. This is not a big threat to people who are very powerful in the United States. This is a threat to people who are sowing disorder, who are criminals, and that's not going to play out the way that they imagined, is my expectation.
Yeah, I see some of our commenters asking, or Chris is asking for water cannons. I don't know about water cannons. It'd be kind of funny to have glitter cannons on them, though. I saw someone recommend that pink paint filled with glitter. That'd be pretty funny. And then just go arrest everybody who has pink paint and glitter on them. Uh, yeah, no, it's definitely not great. I wish that this stuff would stop in this country. The the idea that we're not allowed to enforce our own immigration law, and that we just have to live with this. There was an interesting statistic that the White House reported. I haven't verified it. I don't know how I would be able to verify it. The White House reported that there were over 300 people who were arrested over the weekend who were illegals, who were involved in these riots. And something like 113 of them had prior convictions other than being illegally in the country. So these are, criminal, like double criminal illegal immigrants, who are engaging in this violence on the streets. And it's just appalling that this would be allowed. Obviously, the California government is not fan. I think we have another video clip, don't we? Yay or nay? The pro rioters clip?
Oh, yeah.
And you kind of get to learn what the agitators look like. And I'm seeing a decent amount of them out here right now, always dressed in black, always with face coverings, not holding any signs. And as I told you earlier, Sean, a lot of people were showing up here and they were being given earplugs, gas masks, water bottles, not to drink. A lot of those water bottles are being thrown. So, unfortunately, it looks like we might be heading for another night of things crossing the line here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so there's more evidence that this is a professionally paid uprising, insurrection, you might even call it, since they are attacking federal buildings. These things started by protesters trying to block ICE agents from exiting the building in which they work to go out into the field and enforce immigration law. And as I said earlier, the irony here is that these are the immigration laws. If you think they're too strict, these are the ones that the Democrats agreed to. If you think that we would be able to implement federal immigration law beyond what the Democratic Party, which is very much pro illegal immigration, that is very clear. If you think that it was possible to implement strict, draconian, fascistic immigration law in this country with the Democrats in power for so long, you're smoking something, or maybe you have too much tear gas in your eyes and you can't think straight. This idea, and I think CNN had a clip the other day where, while these riots are going on now, it's day 5, and we're probably going to see a lot more violence on Saturday with all of these, with these organized group No Kings out there. It's going to be a bad Saturday. Donald Trump is actually, that's right. CNN polling showed that his number one issue is immigration. And he has a +1 overall with all voters on immigration, whereas in 2020 he was he was 23 points underwater on immigration 4 years ago. So this is a small minority of people who are against enforcing immigration law, and it's if I was in this country illegally for 20 years, I'm trying to relate, right? So let's say I was in this country illegally for 20 years. And then now suddenly they're going to enforce the law. I mean, I knew the entire 20 years that I'm not here legally, and that I had 2 decades or so to get my act together and find a way to be here as a legal resident, if not a citizen, but at least a legal resident of the United States. But if I blew it off for 20 years and then suddenly, like that, federal agents are actually enforcing the law, and I'm going to have to pay the consequences for not following the law for the last 2 decades, I can understand how that can be very, very traumatic and make people very upset and maybe even take to the streets. But too bad. They would kick me out of Mexico if I went down to Mexico on let's say a tourist visa and decided to just stay in, wherever I was, maybe Cabo or something, stay there for 20 years. They would kick me out. If I did that in England, they would kick me out. Why is this the only country, the United States, where you can enter the country illegally, never make any efforts to make yourself a legal resident, and then it's the fault of Donald Trump and the government and ICE agents who should be pelted with rocks for enforcing the law that you knew you were breaking for 20 years. Obviously, it's not an ideal situation. It sucks. But I think the American people are kind of sick of the laws not being enforced at all. That is basically how we've been living in this country for decades. And so all of that in my head, I think a lot of the American people are like, I just don't have a lot of sympathy. I'm sorry. You had your chance to get to be legal in this country and you didn't take it. That is not my fault. And it is not the problem of the federal government or anybody else but you. In fact, just one last thing while I'm ranting, just one last thing. Those NGOs, Linnea, that you had mentioned that are there to help immigrants, do you know what would have been a great use of those $30 million? Getting all of those illegal immigrants legal status by having them actually apply and maybe get back in line and do whatever. But that's not what they were doing. They were helping those illegal immigrants collect federal benefits, perhaps. But they certainly were not trying to make them legal. That would have been a great use of that organization and money. Oh well, opportunity lost.
Jim, that would have gone against their interests, though, to make those people legal. If you have people here who are here illegally that are basically working for you, you have blackmail over them. You have extortion over them. You can say you have basically, you don't have to even say it out loud. You can just tell them what they have to do in order to remain, and that's it. They'll do it. I mean, why wouldn't they? So again, one of the things that happens in all these situations is that people have interests in outcomes. And so if you have an interest in, say, political power, Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass will say particular things and push for particular policies in order to fulfill those interests. And so they're just following their interests, and making these people legal is probably not in the interests of the immigration lobby.
Yeah, Jim, I want to correct you on something. I think that if you tried to overstay your visa by 20 years in Mexico, they'd do a lot worse to you than just, deporting you back to the U.S. I think you would end up in a very uncomfortable prison for a while. Who knows for how long before you were able to get a lawyer. I've heard some horror stories over there. All righty. Well,
yeah, but look on the screen. Look what Andy brought up there. It's like the compensation. That's their job out there, to be throwing bricks and stuff at the police, looking for the toughest badasses in the city of Los Angeles. Compensation $6,500 to $12,500, depending on experience. So, if you have a lot of experience assaulting cops in riots, you're going to make the high end of that. Isn't that great?
Yeah. It's not good.
This is all about ensuring that rule of law is undermined. And remember that what this is, especially in California, what's going on right now is the attempt to pit the state government against the federal government, and to say the state government is here to protect you. It's going to protect you, and the federal government is going to attack you. So again, it's the contrast between riots in the streets or tanks in the streets. And the idea is, well, we're not seeing any tanks in the streets. We're not seeing that, but we are seeing the riots in the streets, thanks to X and other sources that were not available in 2020, for example. So what's happening there is they're setting up an alternative government, and they're using the California government as that stalking horse. But the reality is that it's not a very attractive picture. It's not something you would say, if you're living in South Carolina or Iowa or Arkansas, are you going to say, yes, this is exactly what we want our state to be like? We want it to be like California. We want it to be on fire all the time and have people, throwing chunks of concrete at the police. People aren't really attracted to that. But the idea behind it all is to say that we are here to protect you from this awful fascist federal government. The problem that they have is they're not protecting anybody. And so that's why you get these news stories minimizing the riots, saying, well, it's only a small part of California. You're protected by what? By the indifference of the rioters, that there is not enough rioters to go around. They're not in Brentwood now, so you don't have to worry. They're not in Pasadena. You don't have to worry. No, it's an absurd notion, but that's what they're trying to do. They're not going to be successful at it because it's a stupid plan.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and I can't get into this too much because we probably should move on to our next topics, but there is a lot of interesting stuff out there about the types of techniques that a lot of these organized rioters and protesters use in terms of making sure that they push kind of sympathetic looking characters to the front of the line and stuff. Like if they're about to have a clash with police, they'll get their like elderly and people with babies and stuff to go to the front of the line to hide all of the like fighters. It's cowardly and it's disgusting, and I'm sick of hearing about these people. Anyway, so related to the issue of the media, you know, either actively lying or gaslighting or whatever it happens to be about this subject, they've pretty much destroyed all of their credibility all the time, or for all time at this point. And so our next topic is a little bit less news and more just thought provoking about these issues in general. So the Honest Broker blog, not the one run by Roger Pelkey Jr., but by a gentleman called Ted Gioia. Yeah, I think that's right. Gioia. Sam brought this to our attention, and I thought it was worth looking at for a minute. He says that the knowledge structure that has dominated everything for our entire lifetime and for our parents and grandparents is collapsing, and it's taking place everywhere all at once. If this was just an isolated situation, a problem in universities or media or politics, the current hierarchy could possibly survive, but that isn't the case. The crisis has spread into every sector of society which relies on clear knowledge and respected authority. And he lists 10 signs that this collapse is happening. And I'm going to go over them because they are good. I'll keep it brief as much as possible. All right, so first, the replication crisis in science. And to explain that briefly for our viewers, scientific claims need to be able to be repeated experimentally so that they can be verified. 40% of studies published today can't do this. So we can't prove nearly half of the stuff that's being pushed as fact. Second, public distrust of experts has intensified. Gioia says, the only experts who still possess authority are blue-collar ones. The public still wants to hire the best plumber or car mechanic or hairstylist and will pay more if these workers have established a reputation for expertise. But the expertise of white-collar professionals is derided at every turn. And in this case, white-collar includes lawyers and academics, scientists, all sorts of people like that. All right. Number 3, the career path for knowledge workers is breaking down, and many have only unpaid student loans to show for their years of training and preparation. That includes people who like write code for a living, that kind of thing. Number 4, funding for science and tech research by warm bodies anyway, is disappearing in every sphere and sector. So funding for normal type of research is going away. Funding for replacing people who physically do research with robots or AI programs that can do that research for them is growing. Number 5, universities have lost their prestige and have made enemies of their core constituencies. Number 6, plagiarism is getting exposed at all levels, from students to corporations and all the way to Harvard's president. That would be Chris Rufo's research, I believe. I think I'm right on that. I think it's Chris Rufo who's been publishing stuff about Harvard scandals. Yep. Number 7, AI is imposed everywhere as the new expert system, but when it hallucinates and generates ridiculous...
Connected.
What was that? Oh, somebody's robot is saying something to me. Anyway, AI is imposed everywhere as the new expert system, but when it hallucinates and generates ridiculous responses, the authorities again take this for granted. 8, science and technology are increasingly used to manipulate and exploit and not serve. 9, scandals are everywhere in the knowledge economy, from the finance sector to COVID. And 10, we hear constant bickering about fake science from all political and ideological stances, but nobody talks about true science. Okay, so after all of that is said, the big question is here, does this knowledge system that he just outlined actually deserve what's happening to it? Does it deserve to fail? And I would say place it from there. Sam, you first.
Certainly, the people who populated these systems brought it on. Let's put it that way. They brought it on. The fact that scientific studies don't replicate, a lot of that has to do with the incentives within the system, which is you can get a lot of money for a study that has some possibly controversial elements to it, or possibly it sounds like it's a good thing. It'll help the poor, or help people who are ill in some way. So on and so forth. We're going to find a cure for a particular disease. Those are all very good things. The problem is that your endeavor is to find out the truth, to find out whether this let's say chemical that you could take, this vitamin that you could take, will cure some sort of lung disease or something. Okay, well, you find out that it doesn't. That's not a win, but in reality, in real science, it is a win. Now we know that doesn't work, and if you can replicate it, you test it properly, replicate it, and say no, it doesn't work. So we move on to the next thing. We're not still using bloodletting. We're not still putting leeches on people, although I understand that some of that's coming back, and I suppose it could help relieve a migraine headache by lowering your blood pressure. But the point is that we learn from the failures to confirm hypotheses just as much as we can learn from the actual confirmation of hypotheses. But it looks like less of a success when you have a study and you find that, oh, really, that doesn't work. That doesn't help. So you want to find the things that actually work, because of course that is the goal, to find things that will help people. So you go through this, and the incentives are to cheat. The incentives are to say that, well, it didn't work for everybody, but we found this little group here that for whom it does work. And also, on top of all that, this is all based on statistics. And statistics, they generate probabilities. But as the great writer William Briggs says, that probability is not inherent in anything. It's only a human thing. So you say that it's probable that the Indiana Pacers will win tomorrow night. I hope it is, but it's not inherent in the Indiana Pacers or the Oklahoma Thunder, Oklahoma City Thunder, or the referees. The probability is inherent in the person who's looking at the situation and making a guess out of it. Well, how can you say that? Wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it does, because the probability is actually 1 or 0 that the Pacers will win tomorrow. They can only win or not win. So the probability of winning is 1 or 0. The thing is, we don't know in advance whether they're going to win. So we don't know what the probability is. So we look at things around it. We look at the elements of the equation and say, well, this is what I think will happen. And then we all go to sports betting apps and impoverish ourselves. So, but the point is that the whole system of science has become corrupted by both the statistical attempt to prove more than you can prove, and the incentives to try to find ways to say that one's hypothesis is correct. And one reason for that is politics. That if your hypothesis is that, let's say, two groups both have the same general level of intelligence, okay? So now we're getting a very controversial area there. And that's your goal, but you don't prove it. It's the stats don't show it. But then you say, well, really the stats do show it, because the probability is greater than 0 that they are they're pretty much the same. that the two groups are pretty much the same. That's manipulation. And to cut to the chase, what happens when you come out with that study, and people say, for example, well, let's say your goal is to say that cats love to eat carrots. Okay, that's your goal, and you fiddle with the figures, and you smooth the data. Smoothing the data means to manipulate the data. So you smooth the data, and you find out that cats love carrots. They love to eat carrots. But the world walks around, they say, I never seen a cat eat a carrot. I could try to force a cat to eat a carrot, and it won't do it. And so what happens is as you try to make these things come true in your studies, when they are not true, you undermine the scientific process itself. You undermine respect for science. This has been going on increasingly since the 1960s, when the GI Bill people started to enter the academia. There was a huge flood of people entering academia by way of the GI Bill, especially given the fact that you don't want to go to the Vietnam War, say you don't want to do that. So you're also going into academia for that. So the government policies actually pushed a mass explosion, a population explosion in academia. And so there's a lot of competition in there to get published, because it is publish or perish. So you put all that together, you get all kinds of ridiculous studies that don't mean anything, that are clearly wasteful, and ones that are wrong. So you're undermining the vision of science itself.
Well, a lot of people for a long time had this kind of perspective of scientists in general, that they were infallible in some way, or that they always separated their work from their personal, politics or whatever it happens to be. And it's absolutely not the case. It's very obviously not the case at this point. We saw that especially with COVID. So as this show, I have heard, I was not on this show when you guys were covering COVID, but I heard back in the day you got a little bit of trouble when it came to some vaccine information, and YouTube will never let us be monetized again because of that and other things. So it's gotten really bad. Jim, I mean this system, if it's all propped up on, at this point, lies and corruption, does it deserve to collapse?
It does, and it is collapsing. Just a few thoughts on this. I thought it made a great point about blue collar experts, right? Plumbers, electricians, chefs, even. You know yourself immediately whether you're good at it or not, or a true expert, and so do your customers. If you're a chef and nobody wants to eat your food, you should maybe try to find another line of work. But you don't. If you're in the intellectual realm, what they call knowledge workers, especially in academia, there are no objective standards of achievement at all. It's basically just the only objective standard seems to be if you adhere to hard leftist ideology, then you'll be able to keep your knowledge worker job for about as long as you're alive. And what we're seeing in these elite institutions is a lot of academic fraud that's being more and more exposed, thanks to AI, actually, which is actually pretty great. But our elite institutions have been churning out mediocrities for a couple of generations now. They have a prestigious piece of paper, but they're actually mediocre thinkers and doers. And so I am glad that we are going to see the decline, and we are seeing the decline of the rule of experts, because as both of you pointed out, it seems we cannot trust experts to put objectivity first and their political opinions last, if at all. And COVID was a great example of this. How can anybody trust public health experts ever again after what we went through from the pandemic? Almost every single, not almost, all right, I'll go out on a limb and say it because I'm an expert, right? Every single piece of advice that was given to us by Anthony Fauci and by what's the woman's name? I forget. I'm glad I'm forgetting her name, because she should never be remembered by history unless she's arrested. almost every piece of advice they gave us turned out to be wrong. And they gave it to us anyway. In fact, I know there was somebody who quoted, somebody in Congress quoted Anthony Fauci saying the point is to get people scared so that they'll do what they're told. These are our public health experts who are supposed to be protecting us and keeping us healthy. We can't trust them ever again. They did this to themselves. So just like government public experts and experts in academia, they've burned their own houses down. They're getting what they deserve. And I actually trust a plumber on public health better than I trust Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much all there at this point. So, man, we could stick to this topic forever because there are so many different institutions that we could cover here. But I do want to get into some of our policy based stuff today. We're going to look at the U.S.-China trade deal. So. Our U.S. representative and China just met in London to talk trade, and a deal has apparently been struck. Frankly, it gives me the heebie-jeebies, and I'll explain why. From Reuters, we have President Donald Trump on Wednesday said he was very happy with a trade deal that restored a fragile truce in the U.S.-China trade war, a day after negotiators from Washington and Beijing agreed on a framework covering tariff rates. The deal also removes Chinese export restrictions on rare earth minerals and allows Chinese students access to U.S. universities. Our deal with China is done. Trump, this is me quoting Trump here, subject to final approval with President Xi and I. Trump said on Truth Social, full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied up front by China. Likewise, we will provide to China what was agreed to, including Chinese students using our colleges and universities, which has always been good with me, Trump said. And we are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. Okay. So I think that there is an argument to be made here that this is a questionable deal, unless there's some kind of background plan to get away from Chinese rare earths. We do need them for now because China has the entire planet locked in on their rare earth mineral trade because they run the vast majority of it from the mining to the refining. So because we don't have our own sources currently that we are actively working on, and we certainly don't refine them, not any amount that matters anyway, but we're going to need them. But China is our enemy. We need to be figuring out a way to decouple from them on this issue because these are national security problems. And the student thing right now, given what we've just seen in the news the last couple of days or the last week or two, is pretty mind-boggling to me. We've had more than one event now where it made the news that Chinese students were smuggling in like fungi that destroy major crops and stuff. Though I guess one argument could be made that we're keeping our enemies closer, a spy we know kind of a thing, a spy that we have eyes on. But man, it seems to be playing with fire. Guys, what are we thinking on this trade deal? Is this 4D chess that I'm just not seeing the game plan, or is this kind of one of those like bummer moments?
I think Trump is basically being very conservative here. He's saying that look, this is the best deal we can get. We can have some sort of realignment of our trade balance with China. Even the World Bank, the World Bank is saying that we should fix that. So these are issues that he's got to deal with. But in this present case, you can't just say, okay, we're not going to take any of your magnets or your rare earths. That would obviously be a horrendously messed up situation, cause a whole lot of disturbance in markets and in supply chains. So basically, he says, okay, we'll take those things and we'll put the tariffs at a certain level and so on and so forth. So it makes for a deal where they can keep those things going. But he, from what I've been hearing, he is trying to increase the amount that the U.S. produces of these rare earths and so forth. So this is basically a bridge. It's a very conservative way of approaching it. Just saying, okay, we'll keep it going for now, and then when we can knock them off their pedestal, we'll do that with our own mining. So I think
Yeah.
it's not a big thing to worry about.
Well, and I think part of the problem too is that it's pretty likely that the U.S. is going to see a whole lot of pushback once Americans actually see what rare earth mining looks like. So we'll see how long that lasts. Hopefully, we can figure out a way to get it done without it looking like the Congo cobalt mines and stuff. I'm sure we can do it better, but
Right.
man, because rare earths are so thinly laid throughout the crust, it really does take moving a lot of earth in order to get a usable quantity. So people tend to not have an appetite for strip mining in this country. So we will see. But I wanted to point this out. Jim, do you have anything that you are dying to say about this deal?
Well, no, I mean, just that the United States has a long history of exporting environmental degradation in the interest of being green. So I guess this keeps that thing going. But no, I guess we're going to learn more details in the coming days.
Yeah.
You know, I think we need to do a little more analysis than just a truth social post by the president. But you know, but just first of all, so much for Donald Trump's global trade war going to be a disaster. Once again, the media was completely wrong about that. In fact, inflation is now a non-factor. It's non-existent. I think inflation year to year in the last month was 0.1%. Gasoline prices are down. Egg prices are down. You know, so look, when it comes to making trade deals, I trust Trump or much more than either Biden or Obama or any of the clowns in their administration to make a good deal for the United States. I mean, I remember as you were talking, Sam, my brain went remembering the image of Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, in a meeting with the Chinese, I think, in Alaska, of all places, just kind of meet at the top of the world. And it was a humiliation for our country. And, you know, this is not a president who is into humiliation rituals for himself or for his country. So, you know, and I guess the only thing I share with you, Linnea, the concern about, well, I should say I share concern about Trump's enthusiasm about opening up our American universities to Chinese students. If you think that a good number of these Chinese students are not working for the CCP and are not spies, you're being hopelessly naive, and that is a concern to me because it's been going on. Everybody knows this for decades now. So that's not great, but I guess we'll learn more. But you know, so much for the huge trade war, so much for Trump bungling his way through the global, you know, through the global relations world. So pretty good.
The attempt always is to project Trump as a very extreme character, when in fact this shows you how conservative he is. He's trying to save basically the current system, which will collapse if we don't get control of some things. So he's by no means radical. He's very conservative. And I think this is emblematic of that.
Well, all this stuff is art of the deal stuff, right? Like he comes in way higher than where he's actually willing to go. And that's pretty like standard business stuff. And it just shocks and appalls all the politicians every single time. It's kind of fun to watch.
It is. And the art of the deal means both sides win at least something, or at least they feel as if they won. I mean, because Donald Trump understands
there it is.
If you screw somebody over on every deal you ever make, they're going to stop making deals with you. So he understands the best deals are one where each side feels like they won.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking of screwing people over with terrible deals, across the pond, so this is for our UK listeners. We love you guys. How's Labor doing with their tax scheme against private schools? Not very well. Anyway, I came across this great article in the Telegraph talking about how Labor's attacks on those private schools have absolutely backfired. At the top of the show, I referenced something called the Laffer Curve. This is basically an economic model that predicts that after a certain burden of taxation is reached, government revenue will actually start dropping pretty quickly instead of rising, because people find ways to evade the tax or simply give up whatever behavior it is that they're being taxed over. And that's sometimes part of the plan, but sometimes it's definitely not part of the plan, as it is in this situation. So from the Telegraph, we have Labor had a cunning plan. It was to recruit 6,500 new teachers with the money Sir Keir Starmer's government would raise by slapping private schools with VAT and business rates. The state education sector would receive an injection of 1.5 billion pounds, which, along with the newly trained teachers, would also include career advice and mental health support for pupils. The nation was to be taught a lesson in equality. Resources would be diverted from private schools to state schools in an attempt to level the playing field. But the flagship policy appears to be falling apart spectacularly. Instead of extracting all those billions from private schools, Treasury analysis has suggested that the new tax policy could cost the government an extra $650 million a year. This is because, tragically, students are leaving private schools by the thousands. Apparently, the government did not anticipate this. Their experts told them that maybe 3,000 would exit, but it is at around 11,000 and climbing currently. So the author continues, it now appears that the main benefit of a policy so heavily laden with financial and social costs may not, after all, materialize, as Labor stands accused of abandoning its manifesto pledge to recruit 6,500 new teachers. So they're not even going to be able to pay all those teachers that they claimed that they were going to be able to. And the plan, in the immortal words of Blackadder, is truly so cunning you could put a tail on it and call it a weasel. All right, you guys, we love that. Jim, this kind of thing happens all the time, right? The government, or any government really, thinks that they can just tax their way out of every situation. And then it comes around and it bites them when the people they're trying to target with the taxes evade those taxes in some way. But it's also a problem because now, all of these kids who were getting good educations are now being taxed out of the good education that they were getting, forced into the public school system. I'm sure they'd love to do that here. What's your take here?
Yeah, well, my take is that people on the left, either Labour Party in the UK, Democrats here in the United States, seem to have skipped all of their basic economics classes because they don't understand even the basics of incentive structures. This is entirely predictable. Of course, we're showing the Laffer Curve on the screen here, where that's at a certain point. Well, Democrats and people on the left, I'll just say lefties, tend to think that rich people they're all Scrooge McDuck. They're all just swimming around in gold coins, and they're just sitting on their money and spending it on things that they like, but they have limitless amount of money to spend. It's just the only problem is that we don't have our hands on it in the government to be able to do with it as we wish. And so that's the mindset of putting these high and punitive taxes on public schools. Who did Keir Starmer think was going to pay those taxes to the government? The schools, right? No, the schools have to charge the families of the students more money in order to afford these suddenly new big punitive taxes. And so you're seeing the inevitable result of that. The families can't afford that cost being passed down to them, so then they end up going into the public schools. So what you end up doing is not collecting, as it said in the article, what was it, a net minus? The whole plan ended up costing the government money, not making whatever the 1.2 trillion pounds they thought they were going to end up getting. And so you end up with kids that would have ordinarily been in private schools and enjoying that private education, now having it too expensive thanks to government policies. So now they have to go into the public schools, which cost more money and take more resources. And it is it's the inevitable. If you understand anything about economics and incentives, you would know before you even propose something like this how it would turn out. But people on the left, the Labour Party in the UK, they have to learn the hard way.
Yep, and it looks like we lost Sam. We're having a couple of technical glitches going on at the same time here. Rumble just went down. Something weird is going on. Anyway, hopefully we're still alive. I don't know if we are.
We said the word COVID 5 times, and now we're getting nuked
yeah,
from
no,
space.
that's what it is. We said it, and now they're shutting us down for that. And now we're making fun of Keir Starmer, so they're going to come after us for that as well. Who knows? Yeah, it's pretty interesting to watch this happen over and over. And it was also interesting to me when I read the article that apparently they had, as they often do, experts, again, analysts, doing all this research to see what was going to happen or what the expected revenue would be from this, and whether or not they would actually be able to afford all of the teachers that they claimed that they wanted to hire and all the resources they wanted to buy for the public schools from this income that they expected to get. And they ended up being incredibly wrong about the number of people who it was going to force out of the system, for one, or the private school system anyway, for one. And it's the major tragedy. I don't give one rip one way or the other whether or not labor achieves their goals in tax revenue. I would hope that they would fail to steal more taxes from people, but the victims in this case are the people who were previously receiving what was likely a good education in the private school system. From what I understand, the UK's private school system is actually very, very good. So all of these kids who are receiving good schooling are now going to have to maybe go to public schools. And now the public schools have less money than they anticipated having. So they're in an even worse position than they were before. It's pretty incredible how badly that they can fall out. Anyway, so it looks like we've lost Rumble. YouTube is still working. X is still working. We should probably end it here. I think,
too,
Jim,
right?
what are you thinking here?
Well, we should probably have Andy cue up the exit music here right now. But it just this whole story, and I'm glad we got a chance to touch on it at the end of the show today. And it reminds me of the way Democrats think about tax revenue. That if we just tax these people with these at these income levels at this rate, we are going to get this amount of money. It never works out that way, because higher taxes change the incentives of what people do with their money and their wealth, and you never end up collecting more, as much, let alone more than you had anticipated. Even all these, we talked about being ruled by experts. The Congressional Budget Office gets numbers wrong all the time. That's just the nature of how complicated economics is, which is why the best public policies, when it comes to the economy of the United States, especially, is pro-growth. What you want to incentivize is not people trying to evade government taxes, but having tax rates that are so low that it encourages more risk of capital in the private sector, which generates jobs and revenue that comes into the government just because you're expanding the pie. You're making the pie larger by growing your economy. That's what Art Laffer convinced Ronald Reagan about 50 years ago, and that law seems to be pretty strong, and violating it brings misery.
Well, it turns out that also our exit music is not working. So
is that right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Okay. So StreamYard is crashing out on us, you guys. So we are going to have to end it here. Anyway, so that's all the time we have. No exit music for you today. So you're going to have to listen to me very dully without any kind of cool background sound. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Sorry about the issues towards the end there. But we are live every single week on Thursdays at noon Central on Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, usually, unless it's crashing. So Jim, do we have anything to pitch real quick here before we close it out?
You can join us at this same channel at this same time, but on Friday for the Climate Realism Show. Lene and I kind of switch seats. I host that one, and she is an expert. So join us for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're actually going to be talking about hurricane season with one of our favorite hurricane experts, Stan Goldenberg, who is at, well, let's just say he worked for the government. Maybe he got fired and let go by Trump. I guess we'll find out tomorrow. So tune in.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so for audio listeners, please give us a nice rating on whatever service you're using and leave a nice review. Thank you so much to our usual panelists. And I guess that's it. We will see you guys next week. Adios. Or not.
Y'all can still hear us, audience. I can't even end the stream.
Yeah,
I'm
think
trying.
we can't even end the stream. That's how badly this program is crashing out on us today.